Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
I kind of think to myself, this is just a room of people, and they're all just people. And they're all people like me who would be feeling equally nervous. And I also think, honestly, what is the worst that could happen? So, hopefully I have a long and fulfilled life, of which this bit is 20 minutes in, let's hope, around 80 plus years. Literally, this is just 15 minutes of my life. It's not going to affect the rest of my life.
Today, I'm talking to award-winning actor, comedian and writer Hugh Dennis. Best known for BBC One's critically acclaimed sitcom Outnumbered. He's also played an emotionally tortured bank manager in the BAFTA-winning show FLEABAG, Toby in the sitcom Not Going Out, and was an ever-present panellist on BBC Two's long-running weekly satirical show Mock the Week. Hugh's also been a regular for over 25 years on BBC Radio 4, both writing and presenting their Friday night comedy, The Now Show. In our conversation, Hugh, whose real name is Pete by the way, shares why he thinks allowing a bit of self-doubt is a good thing, how his job at Unilever helped keep him grounded, and what having a bishop for a father taught him about performance.
I've got a coffee.
You got coffee? We're here. Here we go. We're going to have a conversation about pressure, Pete. And I wondered, what is your experience with pressure?
Well, I think, do you mean in terms of whether I feel pressure or whether I'm under pressure?
Oh, you can start on either of those, actually.
Well, I think I probably have. I mean, when I have conversations in the street with people, they kind of will go, I don't know how you do that. That must be awful. There's a lot of pressure involved in standing in front of people or making TV programs or doing live shows, all that kind of stuff. And bizarrely, and for whatever reason, it's not really a pressure that I've ever felt particularly. And I've always put that down to the fact that, I might say to a surgeon, my God, that looks very, very difficult. How on earth do you do that? But to surgeons, it's just surgery. It's just what they do. So I think I'm pretty lucky actually in that I don't think I'm a very stressed person. But I also suspect that I have probably worked out ways of dealing.
Yeah, I suspect that's true. And I'm wondering if you were to return back to the start of your career, or even actually younger than that, when you've obviously turned it into what I would call a sort of an unconscious competence, that actually you can go and face most things now, and actually you remain in control of yourself and can bring the best of yourself to whatever it is that you're doing. That has to have been learned, Pete, in some way. That must have been learned. I mean, how do you think you've started to drill that ability to stay under the pressure or use the pressure in a way that actually helps you rather than depletes you?
Well, I think partially it's from watching other people in the same situation. So I had, this is sort of really in terms of performing, actually, in that my dad was a bishop. So he was very sort of, public facing with big sort of congregations and all that kind of stuff. And so it seemed a sort of normal part of life to me very early on that you would stand up and you would make speeches and you would do all that kind of thing. It also, this is nothing to do with stress, but it also made me think that it was kind of fine to dress up and wear nice costumes. But I think that helped. And I think also his sort of, if he had made a sermon, for example, in the cathedral on the Easter Day or Christmas Day or whatever, he would always process back down the aisle afterwards as he leave the church, and he would always get to the row which contained me and my mum and my brother, and he would look at my mum, and he would very quietly say, presumably about his sermon or whether he'd done the service well, he would always go, "Was that okay?" and so I was sort of also aware of the fact that you're allowed to kind of doubt yourself, and you're also, that fear and that doubt and that worry at that sort of level isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's actually quite a good thing. Yeah. And I do get nervous, but I don't. It's not kind of debilitating nervousness, and I kind of think that if you didn't get nervous at all, that would be crazy. Because actually you are doing a thing that makes you're going to feel nervous, but it doesn't need to be tremendously stressful. You just you just go, oh, okay, this is happening. All right, well, I've been here before and I know how to deal with that. So I'm just going to get on with it.
I love that because it seems like at a younger age, you've seen a performance through your father's work that has involved a costume. I mean, you laugh about the costume, but I actually think the costume's pretty key. I'm not turning up to play a part every day, but I know the power that a costume, piece of clothing can have on me. And it makes me feel different. And I think it's hugely underestimated, actually, the power of dress in terms of how you show up and what it makes you feel in terms of your ability to be, actually, in whatever situation you want. So there's that. But also, I love this other idea of understanding from a very early age that performance sits alongside doubt, actually. Your dad turning to you and going, "Was that okay?" The two go hand in hand. And I think sometimes we unhelpfully see these sorts of moments of performance as if it's something that is, if you don't feel, or if you do feel nervous, it cannot be your natural ability. So therefore you don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. But you've got to feel nervous because it sort of helps, doesn't it? It's just a question of keeping it all down. And also, this is probably terribly uncharitable, but I think that if you look at people who appear to have no self-doubt at all, you end up with Liz Truss. I think sort of, where you sort of unquestioning, just saying, well, I'm born to be here and I'm doing this, and isn't necessarily good, is it? I don't think.
No, and I think when you said you need to feel it, I totally agree with you. I mean, it stretches me when I feel it. So I know, okay, here it comes. You said, oh, there it goes again. How do you said keep it down. How do you stay in partnership with it so that it doesn't take you over into something that's less helpful?
Well, I kind of think to myself, this is just a room of people, and they're all just people. And they're all people like me who would be feeling equally nervous, so that's fine. And I also think, honestly, what is the worst that could happen? So, hopefully I have a long and fulfilled life, of which this bit is 20 minutes in, let's hope, around 80 plus years. Right? Yeah. So you can just go, literally, this is just 15 minutes of my life. And it's not going to affect the rest of my life. It's not going to, but the basis of my life is somewhere completely different, really. Not in this particular room, not on this particular night. It's all, so having never really thought about how I cope with stress, I obviously do have, I do have coping mechanisms, don't I?
Yeah.
But, and I also have this thing of saying, and I say this to my kids quite a lot, and they probably think I'm ridiculous for saying it, but I go, it'll all be fine. And even if it isn't fine, it'll be fine. Mm. Because it seems to set everything in context to me.
Yes.
And I have been in terrible things. I was the first time I was ever on television, I think, with Steve Punt. We were on a show now long forgotten, but Michael Aspel had a show on ITV, I think, sort of early evening, and we went on to perform this very long, complicated sketch about tube stations. So it doesn't sound terribly promising, but but it lasted about 3.5 minutes, and we were doing it live, which was itself quite tricky because a lot of TV was live then. And about a minute in, possibly less, I completely forgot it. I'd done it 1,000 times, this thing, and I completely forgot it, which I'm assuming was because I was worried about it. I was, and I had to say to Michael Aspel, I said, "I'm terribly sorry. I'm afraid I've forgotten it." Right? This was live in front of how many? I don't know how many million viewers. And he just went, "Oh, well, never mind. Now, moving on," and then did this sort of ridiculous segue to something else. And I thought, that is possibly the worst thing that could happen ever. So I've got through that, and it all seems fine. And therefore, I don't really need to worry about that particularly.
Yeah.
And I think, but part of it, I mean, I might have been saved by low viewing figures in the sense that nobody ever saw me do it and thought that was employable. But also, I sort of thought, that's actually quite a human thing to do, isn't it? To actually panic a bit and forget your line is quite human. And as long as you're, and I just sort of held my hands up and went,
"Yeah,
sorry."
Yeah.
And therefore, the sort of reaction to having done it was also different, I think.
Yeah. And it takes guts, doesn't it, in those sorts of moments to just be able to voice what's going on. I always think that when I watch performers, if I feel that they're not in control, even though they may have forgotten something, then it makes me nervous as an audience member. But the fact that you just said, "I'm really sorry, I've just forgotten it." There's something quite relieving about that for a member of an audience or for somebody that's listening to you or watching you or receiving you.
Yeah, I mean, it is like the, if you're on stage and things go wrong, it's perfectly all right as long as you go, "Oh, well, look, things have gone wrong." And and you're right. It means that the audience don't sort of panic on your behalf, as long as you don't appear to mind.
Yes.
I think that's quite a powerful position to be in, actually.
Yes. So, Pete stroke Hugh, you started in...
I don't know. Pew.
Pardon?
You can go with Pew or Heat.
I could.
Everyone.
Hute or Pew, yes.
Yeah.
Well, you began your career in corporations, didn't you, when you left university? You didn't go straight into this. And so I'm really intrigued, basically, because I spend so much of my time in organizations. We as a business spend time working with leaders in organizations. What did you witness there in terms of pressure? And how do you think what you do now could be useful to leaders and businesses in terms of managing how they perceive pressure?
So when I left university, I had these two choices. Actually, I had three. I could have stayed at university and done a PhD if I wanted to, but it didn't take long to decide I didn't want to do that. And in fact, I joined Unilever. I tried Unilever and comedy. And so I joined the management scheme at Unilever, and I became a Unilever brand manager, product manager, ultimately running Lynx and UK deodorant, which I did for 4 or 5 years. And I actually did it at the same time as being on the telly. So I did both for 5 years. I did both. And I was on Jasper Carrot on the Saturday nights, and I was in Portman Square with Unilever's personal products division Monday to Friday. Now, what that meant in terms of stress, what did that mean in terms of stress? I mean, I think what I learned from Unilever, I think, was that that creativity, and brand managers are meant to be creative, because you're working with ad agencies, and it isn't all about numbers and stuff. In creativity, you sort of have to protect the space around you. In other words, you can't be creative to order, right? However much a company wants you to be creative to order, you can't think of really good ideas if you are feeling under pressure and stressed, because they just don't happen. So what I observed at Unilever, who were, they're a marketing-led company, that they went to enormous lengths actually to sort of protect creativity and protect innovation. And a lot of the time they were just going, look, how do we do this? Do we create these sort of separate units within the company that will just, we won't bother them? We won't bother with the everyday bits of the business, and we'll just let them think, and they can go to the cinema or the pub or whatever, and then sort of think about how, So I sort of learned that that working in a creative business, or working in any business really, which is sort of ideas led, or where you're expected to, think of the next step, you actually sort of have to depressurize it and de-stress the situation. And that is also true now. You can't, when I left Unilever, because Steve Punz and I were by this point doing a program called the Mary Whitehouse Experience, which was on BBC Two, and quite a sort of culty kind of program. And I had to leave because I just couldn't, I could no longer combine these two careers. I thought I could combine them actually for a very long time. I thought, I might actually just stick with Unilever and do this sort of thing as a hobby on the side. I said to Steve, what's it like becoming, full-time sort of creative writer, actor, all the rest of it? And he said, and I think this proves to be absolutely true, he said, you will have a lot of baths, meaning not for cleanliness. I mean, although, they're essential, aren't they? Or showers. But he just meant in terms of thinking. Right? So you sort of have a place where you're going to do your thinking. And he was absolutely right. I went up to about 4 baths a day, I think, at one point, where I was sort of trying to think of stuff and not letting anything else in, actually, I think. I had a great time at Unilever. I was really sort of, I found it very difficult to leave Unilever because it was very creative, and I was in a group of people who were very sort of, they were really, really sort of good colleagues, and I had this fantastic boss for the first couple of years, 2 or 3 years. He was a German-Swiss guy. He was my marketing director, and he, unlike when you join a company and you think, no, I've got to go in and I'm going to have a breakfast meeting, because that's what people do. We're going to have a breakfast meeting. I'm going to get Reinhold, my marketing director, in for a breakfast meeting, and I'm going to talk to him about what I'm doing with links and all that. And I did this one morning, and we got there at 7, and I went into his office to talk, and he went, this is really difficult. Can we not do this again? Well, they said, we'd be much better. Honestly, we'll be much better, even if it's like 8 or 8:30 or something. This is not the right, it's sort of not the right environment to talk about all these things. So we sort of agreed that we would never do that again. And he was a very successful man. He went off to run a big Swiss corporation. But he also said to all of the brand managers, said, I think you should have 3 weeks off in the summer. Right? That's amazing, So all my friends who had gone and joined American banks and things were struggling to take, like 4 days off a year or something. And Reinhold just went, you're going to have 3 weeks off in the summer. And I said, well, why? Why do we need 3 weeks off in the summer? He said, because for the first week, you're recovering from you're just getting used to not working. And then in the middle week, you're actually relaxed. And in the last week, you're worried about going back to work again. So even if you have 3 weeks, you're really only having a week.
Yeah.
I thought was, was very enlightened guy, actually.
sounds it, because that rarely is a conversation that I would hear now. And actually what happens is people are sort of loath to take holidays because of missing things, or not, or when they are on holiday, they're on rather than off, there's all of that. So that does sound incredibly enlightening. There's so much actually in there that you've been talking about. I think this idea of having something that you're running for 5 years at the same time as a full-time Monday to Friday job. I mean, now there's lots of sort of side hustles and people have hobbies, or they're testing something on the side ultimately to leap over. But your point about actually you could happily run both of them and maybe just do the weekend stuff as a hobby. How did one feed the other for you?
I think that I'm not sure that they did really. I think one was a sort of antidote to the other, slightly.
Okay.
Rather than feeding it. I mean, I was very, very lucky as well, because the way it began really was that I got this job with Unilever, and Steve Punt and I started doing clubs. So we did Jongleurs and we did the Comedy Store and places. It was all in central London, and I was working in central London. And one night at the Comedy Store, Jasper Carrott came down and said, "Would you like to be on my show on Saturday night on BBC One?" Which is a ridiculous thing, an utterly ridiculous thing to ever have happened. But at that point, you just go, "Oh, yeah, that seems fine." Yeah, didn't seem odd. Just going, "Oh, yeah, that's fine." And Steve, because it was on Saturday, that meant that at that point I had 13 million viewers a week or something. This program. So Steve's attitude was, "That's brilliant. And we'll do that. Yeah, that Saturday night, that's 13 million viewers a week." And my attitude was, "That's brilliant. That Saturday night, that means I can carry on working for Unilever." And I did. So it was just on the Saturday. So I would go to Telly Centre on the Saturday, and then I'd have Sunday off, and then I'd be back in the office on Monday. And I think, in terms of a performing career, it was quite useful, because it stopped you disappearing up your own fundament, because you would go in on a Monday morning and people would go, "That sketch was genuinely terrible," or some people would go, "Oh no, that's good." So that was quite useful. Yeah. And in terms of actually the sort of a length of a performing career, the sort of fundamental thing I picked up from Unilever was that it's called show business for a reason. You have to treat it as a business. So one of the things you've absolutely drilled into us was that, Unilever has a core business. The example they used was Unilever could make as much money from overnight lending because they were so cash rich, right? And they had all these sort of net proceeds of sale coming in and all that kind of stuff. If they did overnight lending, they would make as much money as they did from actually selling the products, right? And therefore, it would be perfectly reasonable for Unilever to become a bank as well as a products company, right? But they weren't going to do that because that would distract them from their core business, which was selling deodorant and sausages and edible fat. Interesting thing. So they just carried on. And I have always held on to that in my career of thinking, as long as you absolutely got the one thing that you're sort of concentrating on, then you can go off and do lots of things which are peripheral to it. Right?
Yeah. What I really love about this, Pete, is this idea of your main focus. Sort of like you're talking about Unilever, are really clear about, yes, they could make loads more money over here, but actually the core business is over here. And so you've taken that message into your career to say, this is a business. I mean, how does that map out? Because you do loads of different things now. How is that mapped across in terms of your ability to really focus and remain calm and enjoy what you do when you must have so many invitations to do loads of different things? How have you taken that principle into your life?
I've been very lucky because many of the things I've done have been very long running. So Mock the Week was 17 years, and the Now Show, I think we just finished actually on Radio 4, was 26 years in one programme. And I think the longevity, I never know which one it is, of those is partially down to the fact that actually I have never felt this thing of going, well, I do this and then I jump to that thing and then I'll keep on going that way. You go, no, I like this. It's an absolutely sort of solid basis on which to base everything else. So as long as we make those work, and clearly I'm not the only one making those work.
No.
Very lucky because I'm surrounded by lots of people who wanted the same sort of thing. It is then all right to go off and drive across Ethiopia with Dave Baddiel or with or whatever it is. I think that's all it is. You just really look after the fundamentals of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you also never ever think it's all right just to be you.
Ooh, say more about that. Come on.
Well, in the sense that you are, whatever you do and whoever you are, you're actually part of a team. It can't take credit for everything. Most of what's happened to me has got nothing to do with me. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time and surrounded by people who are really good at what they do. And I quite often think I've absolutely no idea how I got here, but I'm very glad I'm here. And thank you.
Yeah.
But it's all teams and collaboration, isn't it? It's not always you.
No, absolutely. And I think how this relates to the work that we do is this idea of collaboration is tough to hold on to right now because there's so many individuals going off and doing their own thing that the power of collaboration, particularly as businesses are getting larger and, across the global and you're hiring experts. And I was just having a conversation this morning around, how do you turn a group of experts into a team, a collaborative team? And how do you manage all the other people in that team? Yeah. And, that I think what you've just said feels absolutely true and honest and real and energizing, and knowing that you're all in something together to create. And I think this is what's so interesting about performing arts particularly, is that you have a team and you have an end product that you're all putting your expert input into to make the overall show brilliant. And I think what's missing sometimes in the work that I do is that the clarity of the show is not there. So you've got all of these experts working towards something, but the skill of the leader is to try and make the end result or the actual priority become really clear. Yeah.
But it's also, I think, about, and this sounds like a rather odd thing to say, actually, I think. It's about, if you are a leader in those circumstances, it is about the sort of environment. In other words, there's absolutely no point in getting a load of experts into a room and saying, okay, we're all going to collaborate if the room is a horrible room and there are no nice biscuits. And nobody's bothered to provide tea, right? And there is no, and I say this really on the basis of, so when I did Outnumbered, for example, one of the great joys of Outnumbered was the fact that, immensely collaborative, and we're really just saying words that, and doing scripts that have been Andy Hamilton and Guy Jenkin have worked on and all the rest of it. But the whole production was just brilliantly handled in the sense that we filmed in two houses in Wandsworth. One was the filming house, one was like a green room house. They were next door to each other. And they decided, and this was largely because there were kids involved, they decided that we had to have a permanent cook who was lovely. Really, really lovely lady called Pam, and she cooked for everyone the whole day. So you could while you were learning scripts or thinking about things, you could smell lunch being cooked, and you think, and we all sat down together, and you end up having conversations because you're, the sound guy or the lighting guy or whatever, and it just improves everything because everybody feels that they can say the things they need to say, and there was no real sense of hierarchy. And it was everybody looked after everybody else, and we all had a really, really happy time. And I think that came over in the show, and that was sort of obvious in the results. And I would contrast that with when I was at Unilever, because I was on the telly. They asked me to write the end of year review for Unilever, which is sketches, and it was quite a dangerous area to go to when you're writing sketches about your boss. So you have to be quite careful. But the group of young brand managers had all been on training courses. We'd all been on them together. They said, "You write most of it, but we will write this together." And we all sat in this very sort of charmless sort of boardroom, and we had to do it because a guy 3 years above or whatever was kind of chairing it. We all had to write it in this incredibly sort of like business-like way. Whereas if you had an idea, you had to put it through the chair, and then they would send the idea back out and see what we all thought of it. And there was no sort of spontaneity about it. I mean, it sort of absolutely killed the creativity in the room just because it was handled wrongly. And I think, and in terms of the wider conversation on stress and how you manage it, actually, I think there's also, if you are someone who feels very stressy because stress is sort of peripheral, isn't it? You can be worried about the thing. You can be worried about where you're going to write the thing and it will be funny. But the stress of it is someone coming in all the time and going, "Have you finished the thing yet? Have you done the thing? Where's the thing?" Or can you come in here for 5 minutes? And you never get that kind of train of thought going. And somehow I feel it's sort of incumbent upon bosses to recognise the fact that actually that sort of they add stress to situations, sometimes needlessly, because they're asking things which don't really need answering, but sort of make themselves feel a bit better because they want to know how the process is going fine, but it's rather difficult. You're coming in all the time.
Before we continue, I think there are a few things worth capturing from these examples that Hugh's sharing. He's really emphasising the impact that the environment can have on both individual and collaborative performance, particularly when it comes to creativity and innovation. I can remember when I was a teacher, we had a visit from the then Secretary of State for Education, and one of the comments that he made in his report, which I will never forget, was the value that he saw in the quality of the in-the-moment conversations between all of us who were teaching the same subject and sharing the same office. We were either solving problems together or we were enhancing each other's thinking. And this example came to mind as I listened to Hugh when he was describing the green room house used on Outnumbered. And when he said the environment just improved everything. Everyone looked after everyone else, and that was reflected in the result. Understanding and articulating your conditions for success to those you work with is becoming increasingly important, I think, especially now that we have more choice about how and where we work. Hugh's mentioned that creating space to think and to focus is really vital to him. Actually, I think it's vital to many of us, and yet the environments and the systems we work in, as well as sometimes the people we work with, can compromise our ability to honour those conditions. Constant interruptions, back-to-back meetings, and constantly connecting to our devices are just 3 things that spring to mind right now. We have to be deliberate about owning our conditions for success. This will likely vary depending on what you're focusing on. For example, I know that getting outside and moving helps me think through ideas or digest a concept. And I also know that if I need to focus, I want quiet, water to drink, and lots of light. Do you know what environment you need to set yourself up for the work that really matters to you? And do you know what others need? Do you ever ask? It made me smile with recognition when Hugh described the person who passes their stress on by asking, "Where's the thing? Have you done the thing?" Releasing the stress that they're feeling onto others. I witness this a lot. If you lead others, how often do you have honest discussions about the environment and conditions that they need to achieve the results that you want? And how often do you share the conditions that make a difference to you? Becoming aware of how you enhance or decrease your own or someone else's capacity to do their best work through the environment you create, I think matters more than ever in our world of multiple distractions.
When we spoke on the briefing call, you said a sentence that really struck me when you said you have to train the people around you, particularly in high pressure I think there's a distinction between stress and pressure potentially. They are irritant stressors that are coming in to what you're trying to do, these people coming in and interrupting you and asking you questions. But I love this idea of you training the people around you. Say more about that.
I sort of do this in relation to agents and things now, that you get, or anyone actually, not if you get a kind of a work email, or I'm going to start this again. I do this in relation to my kids actually. So I will regularly get WhatsApps and things from my kids, which will go, Dad, where are you? And you haven't picked up the phone or you don't reply immediately, you get another one going, what's going on? Earth to Dad, all that sort of stuff going on. And you go, this is sort of unnecessary, really. So you sort of try and train them by not replying immediately. Then you're going to have to wait for a bit. And I think that you can sort of do that within organisations or within writing rooms, or and I do slightly work on the principle of if someone's pushing for a script, in your head you're going, do you want it now or do you want it good?
Yeah, because
they might well be different things. So that I appreciate that's very difficult with bosses, because bosses are they're your boss, aren't they? But that subtly, I'm pretty sure there are ways, whether it's just sitting down in conversation with them and going, look, I find this quite difficult. I will get this done. I need a bit of space, really.
I think this is so important about, you said again earlier, not letting the outside in.
Yeah.
When you need to be in you, or you need to be in what you're doing. Do you know how you do that? You just described a way of, just training people.
I have noticed in myself that I do just naturally have a way, which is probably really irritating for the people around me, but I do have a way of just absolutely concentrating on the thing I'm doing and not allow stuff in. I suppose I quite often think that open plan offices are terrible for that. I mean, they're great because you've got to, you have to interact and share ideas and things. But when you're actually finishing a thing off, it's really difficult sitting in an open plan office, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think, and this isn't an answer to how do I do it, but it's an example of what happens. So when my son was very young, I remember he was sitting on my shoulders. We were watching telly, and someone came in and said, do you know that he's hitting you around the head all the time? Just sort of patting, sort of like doing this. And I simply wasn't reacting to my own child hitting me around the head. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why that is. And I thought, I think that's because as an actor, you're constantly having people fiddling with your face. Makeup and people come in and they're sort of diving around and sometimes you don't even notice that they've done it. So I think I have sort of been trained in a way for all these things that are kind of happening peripherally while I'm concentrating on the thing that I need to concentrate on.
Yes.
But I don't know how that is. I suspect I'm just lucky, actually.
Well, again, I think I'm hearing a practice, years and years of practice. If it's the first time someone has touched your head when you're trying to do something, I can imagine it being unbelievably distracting because it's unusual and it's new. But if you're used to looking at scripts, or you're focusing on one thing and there's lots of people around you managing other things, I suppose it's a practice that you've thrown yourself into an environment where you're used to working with.
Possibly there is, you need an appreciation as a boss of the fact that different people work in different ways, don't you?
Yeah.
So, and you need different people to work in different ways because you need different types of input. Don't try and make everybody do the thing that makes you comfortable. Try and let them do the thing that makes them comfortable, and then you will find that you get more out of them somehow.
Yeah.
Listen, it's 40 years since I worked. No, it's not quite 40 years, actually. I'm making myself older than I am. But it's... it's certainly more than 30 years since I worked in a corporation, so a big corporation. But I'm sure it's all changed. But I'm sure the fundamentals of how on earth you get people to work together and get the best out of them,
yes,
and how you get the best out of yourself, I'm sure they're still pretty much.
Yeah, and do you feel that pressure is an essential part of what you do now? I mean, this whole idea of you've got to feel something. See, I really do feel that I am better and growing further if there's something that's slightly stretching me. And whether you call that pressure or not, it's something that actually keeps me growing, and it does make me feel bubbly inside, and it does make me have a physical reaction of potentially, the adrenaline pumps. But ultimately, I know that I need it. And I'm, the whole principle of these conversations is around how do we help people manage the energy of pressure in a way that allows them to keep growing and keep being better.
I think that it has always been important to me to not get too comfortable. So you sort of want to somehow move outside your comfort zone, whatever that is. And that's, it's sort of scary, but actually it's very enlivening, isn't it? It's what you need to do to keep on growing. It kind of could be anything, really. So I think pressure probably is very important, just to keep you sort of feeling alive.
Yeah.
Probably. I sort of, I don't know quite how to answer that question, which is clearly a useless answer for you. But
not at all.
There you go.
Not at all. I mean, I suppose it's asking you also, I think what's interesting about your profession, and I've got people in my family who are in the same profession, it feels very dependent on other people's decisions. And that is very pressurizing in some ways because, all of us crave progress and crave control in some shape or form. And yet the world that you operate in, and maybe not so much at your level, but how do you stay enlivened in an industry which is on the whole being decided upon by others?
Well, my version of that, I think, is that I've sort of created my own work, actually. Mm-hmm. So, Steve Punt and I have actually, we're going out on tour now, which is us. That isn't reliant on anyone else. I know that if I'd had to sit by a phone and wait my whole career, if I thought that was what it was going to be like as an actor, I don't think I would be an actor. I think I would have stopped and got something where I had more control somehow. But I think because I don't think I would have been able to bear it. Actually, I find all that is really, really, really tricky thing, isn't it? Because you do feel as an actor you're completely in the hands of other people.
Yeah.
There must be aspects of your life that you create or you value where that doesn't matter. And I also think that you sort of have to be careful actually that what you do. I think that, for actors, this is particularly sort of important thing. I think you can't let what you do define you.
Yeah.
You're actually a person, aren't you? And I think I think that's also true in business. Actually, I think that I used to, when things weren't going well at Unilever, I did occasionally think to myself, do you know what? It's only a deodorant. That's all it is, actually. It's just a deodorant. It's a very important deodorant, and it's got global reach and all the rest of it. But in the end, all I'm actually doing is helping people make their armpits less smelly. That's it. And that sort of leveled me out again, actually, and that it feels like you've got to hold on to a thing where you go, I don't think this is the most important part of my life somehow.
Mm.
Oh, yes to this. I think it's especially true in high pressure or high challenge situations too. In those moments we can too easily fall prey to the belief that it is the most important part of our life, which then, before we realise it, can segue into our self-worth becoming cemented to the outcome. Remembering that we're not only what we do is so important, and a darn sight healthier too. Our work and interests are an integral part of our individuality. The problem is when we feel solely defined by these external factors. When people ask me what I do, sometimes, depending on how provocative I want to be, I'll answer, what do I do when? Hugh is reminding us that whatever we do, however successful we are so much more than that. I remember a very successful leader who had stepped away from a highly prominent role in a very well-known organisation lament that he had gone to an event a few years later and felt at a loss because no one knew who he was. He got so used to his title, after he no longer had it, he didn't know how to be. I want to recap on the point that Hugh made about reminding himself that when things weren't going so well at Unilever, that he was only actually selling deodorant. This is such a great example of forcing ourselves to get a sense of perspective when things appear to be tough. Perspective makes us ask, is it really that tough? In the grander scheme of things, is it really that tough? When we can consider that, we release the pressure valve that we place on ourselves. The problem is, of course, that when we solely define ourselves by the success of what we do, gaining this sense of perspective becomes a lot harder. We can get so caught up in our own pressure, our challenge, and often our own self-importance, that we define ourselves by what we do, and our inherent worth increases or decreases based upon that success. When we succeed, we are a success. When we fail, we're a failure. When we learn to decouple our worth from what we do, it's liberating and actually gives us so much more choice, which is precisely what we need when we're feeling under pressure. It's so important to remember that there are many pieces that go together to make us who we are. As Walt Whitman once said, we contain multitudes. One of Hugh's multitudes is that he's an actor. And it's one of the dilemmas of that profession that he goes on to talk about now.
Weird thing, as an actor, as you get older, you think about this more, actually, in that, most people have to retire, right? And actors don't have to retire. And you think, well, that's both a good and bad thing, isn't it? Because you can carry on going for as long as you like and all the rest of it. But what it means is that you don't ever think about the different stages of your life. So most people who have to retire at 67 or whenever it is, they're going, well, I'm going to stop then. And then I've really got to plan the next bit because I'm going to want to enjoy the next bit. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to, whatever it is. But actors don't do that. Actors just go, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to. So in a sense, you're sort of missing. Yeah. There's a danger of missing that last bit where you could, go off and travel all the time because you're sitting by a phone thinking, why aren't I in Midsummer Murders? I mean, I did ask you. And it seems rather a silly thing to do, really. You should sort of, go off and have a lovely time where you're finally released from the worry of thinking, no one's called me for weeks.
Yeah. But what is it that keeps you, what is it that you really, really want to cause, Pete, in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Yeah, like cause, like what do you do? Why are you doing what you're doing now for the next 20 years? What is it that what keeps you with this real sense of what next? What is it in service to, in a way?
Well, I mean, it is sort of addictive, actually. Is what, it is, there's something kind of amazing about making people laugh, isn't there? There's something very nice about it, and standing on a stage and getting a reaction, isn't there? And I think that probably is what drives you on. There's something fantastic about getting to play other people with other lives. And this, I quite often think about this, is that it's not something most people get to do. Most people are themselves, aren't they, in their lives and careers, and actors aren't. They are specifically other people for most of their careers, and then they, and maybe that's one way of dealing with the stress, actually, because you just go, on the Peter and the Hugh thing. When I'm at home, I'm Peter. When I'm performing, I'm Hugh, and that's quite useful because you kind of think of them as two completely different people.
The joy of making people laugh. I mean, what a great job.
Yeah. Well, when it goes well, it's great, yeah. And when you do, it's awful.
And I suppose when it doesn't, that's part of growing the muscle, isn't it, of dealing with it?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, you kind of, early on, there were nights where you thought, I'm never, ever going to do this. And also, I think that we did a gig very early on. We did a gig called the Tunnel Club, which was in Deptford. It was just at the entrance to the Blackwall Tunnel. And there were 2 open spots. And Steve and I were the second open spot. And the first open spot was also a double act called the Two Sloanes, who came on in tweed jackets and all that. And within about 30 seconds, this dates it. This gives you the era. One of them was hit on the head by a can of styling mousse, and they left. They left the stage, and we then had to go on. And because the audience had their blood, they were nice to us, actually, and it was fine. And I've quite often thought, if that was the other way round, I would probably be a Unilever marketing manager in Argentina or something.
I am sure, though, Pete, if you'd been absolutely dreadful, they'd have found another styling mousse container.
Oh, maybe, yeah. It was odd. Most of them are skinheads. I remember thinking, why have you got styling mousse? There's literally nothing to stop.
Brilliant. So here are 2 questions that I ask every guest on this podcast, which is, if there were 2 things that you would pay forward to anyone listening to this podcast who wanted to be better under pressure, what would you offer them?
I would offer them kind of be yourself, in the sense of thinking, allow pressure in. Everybody feels this kind of pressure. Everybody feels it, and it's not a question of whether you're going to feel pressure. It's just a question of sort of how you deal with it. And this idea that actually it is a sort of a moment that you are feeling, will go, and then you can get on with the rest of your life. And actually, although it's a very important document, meeting, whatever it is, you've been there before, and actually, without realising it, you have probably been in far more pressurised situations.
Yeah. My business partner is an ex-Royal Marine, and he compares everything with, are you going to die? Just get a sense of perspective on what it is that you're feeling right now. Luckily, you're not at war.
No, exactly. And you can also go, you can kind of look at, in the same way that you can. I always think this is kind of useful as well, to stop yourself disappearing up your own bottom, of going, I'm only, I might be this person here now, but that is only because generations and generations of people before me have made decisions that have sort of allowed me to be here and to be me. So, very little of it is down to you. It sort of gives you a sort of sense of perspective, doesn't it? But I think, life is a very, very long thing, hopefully. And what's happening at the moment, pressure-wise, this is also true of exams. You kind of you think at the time that is the most important thing that will ever happen to you, and then you take the exams, and then no one ever asks you what you got. They do sometimes, don't they? But not they take. No, how many conversations do you have now about how you did in your A-levels? I mean, I know they sort of determine, the course you can take, but there are lots and lots of, particularly in the exam things, you go, if you do badly in this exam, that might open up something else. It's not like there's one route through life, is it?
No, absolutely. I know. And I wish I'd known that as a parent as well, actually, because I wouldn't have been so worried on behalf of my children. And also the whole idea of no one referring to them.
No, and I remember a sort of slight epiphany with the kids, actually, when group of parents from all at the same school, we all went to a pub, I think for dinner or something. There were like 12 of us sitting around this one table, and everybody was really worried about what their kids were going to do and where they were going to go and what schools they were going to get into and whether they were in the catchment of this and whether they should move and all the rest of it. And I was sort of joining in quite happily. And then I thought, do you know what? I didn't go to school with any of these people who I'm having dinner with. We've all got completely different careers, but we're all sitting around the same table. So presumably it's all fine.
Yeah.
Everybody just comes from different places and different routes, and there isn't necessarily a best one. And if the one that you think is the better, why do you think it's much better that they go here, or you do this, or that's your next career path? Because actually, you don't know.
No.
You simply don't know. Do you?
No. Absolutely. And what would your second one be, Pete?
So I think the second thing that I would pass on, actually, is that much of stress is sort of unnecessary in the sense that it is caused by people passing stress on. So if you're feeling stressed, actually, quite often people then will tell you a thing, or tell you to do a thing to relieve their stress. And that passes the stress onto you, then everybody gets stressed. And it's a sort of contagious thing, actually. Yeah. So I think you also have to be aware of that. If you are working with people who rely on, who are creative or need to write a brilliant thing, don't pass your stress on to them. Just avoid doing that. Go for a run or something, or have a cup of chamomile tea. But don't go in and say, where is it? We've got to get this done, because if this isn't done, this will never be committed. It's not going to, this is awful, that kind of thing. Yeah. So just, don't be one of those people who relieves your stress by giving your stress to someone else. Find a way of dealing with it, which keeps it to you.
Brilliant. Actually, just before we finish, Pete, there was just one thing in there I'd be interested in you digging into a little bit, is like, what do you do? Just like, obviously I'm passionate about shed and thinking that actually no one can do anything if they're not looking after their sleep, their hydration, their exercise, or their diet. But like, what is it that you do to put the fundamentals in your tank that actually for you to feel energized and to have enough fuel to do what you're doing? What is your non-negotiable out of those?
I suppose my non-negotiable actually is exercise. I feel so much better when I get a lot of exercise, and I play sport, and I'm, increasingly less good at it. But I I sort of love it, and it's sort of having a life outside it goes back to that thing of not defining yourself by what you do, actually. Just, you have a life which is completely different from the life which is causing you stress. And you build time in where you're going walking or going out eating or something. You just don't allow the thing that you do, your job, because it is a job and everything is a job, really, to dominate everything else.
Fabulous. Thank you so, so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.